Now, I like him personally. He's fine. But I don't care about personally. I care about getting the job done. Elon is, to me, a patriot. So, you could call him an employee, you could call him a consultant, you could call him whatever you want. But he's a patriot.
Defended by the president and winning a lawsuit in court, a judge ruling Elon Musk and Doge can keep on going. And the commander-in-chief today unveiling new doubt abroad. Asked about the possibility of new elections in Ukraine, he suggested Volodymyr Zelensky might not be the guy.
We have a situation where we haven't had elections in Ukraine, where we have martial law, essentially martial law in Ukraine, where the leader in Ukraine, I hate to say it, but he's down at 4% approval rating.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Blake Berman. This is The Hill on NewsNation. Among the many headlines tonight in this town and beyond, the Vatican revealing Pope Francis remains hospitalized, the 88-year-old being treated with pneumonia. U.S. forces working with Mexican authorities now to target cartels. And NASA says that chance of an asteroid potentially hitting just got higher. The former head of the International Space Station joins us here in a bit. But first tonight, our Joe Khalil on that brand new ruling involving the fate of Doge. We begin, though, with Robert Sherman at the White House tonight with that non-endorsement from the commander-in-chief. Robert?
Yeah, Blake, it's something we haven't seen in years. The top diplomats for Russia and the United States meeting face-to-face. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff sitting across from the Kremlin's most trusted negotiators, including Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The big focus, thawing the frosty relationships the two nations have had since the war in Ukraine began in order to set the stage for in-depth negotiations. Both the Russians and the Americans saying publicly today they believe they accomplished that, but acknowledge there's much still to hash out. Ukraine's status after the war, concessions for the two sides, security guarantees, and more. But it's not just who was there, but also who was not there. No Ukrainian delegation was present at these talks, and President Zelensky was in Turkey. He has repeatedly said he wants a seat at the table and won't agree to any deal without security guarantees, and more pointedly, made without them. The president was asked about the Ukrainians' concerns and said this.
But today I heard, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed and no city would have been demolished.
President Trump emphasizing he is in contact with the Ukrainians and is more confident a deal can be struck after today's meetings. Also this, Blake, European nations in recent days have floated the idea of putting peacekeeping boots on the ground in Ukraine if a deal is struck. The president saying today, once a deal is in place, he's not opposed to that. Blake?
Robert Sherman live for us at the White House tonight. Robert, thank you. So can the Department of Government Efficiency and Elon continue to fire federal workers? Tonight, a federal judge denied 14 Democratic attorneys general's bid to block Doge, including access to key Treasury Department and IRS data. The U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan saying they had not made the necessary to show, quote, irreparable harm. The White House press secretary saying today it is the president, not Musk, with the final say.
President Trump is the ultimate decision maker for this entire administration. Elon Musk, just like everybody else across the federal government, works at the direction of President Trump. Elon Musk is a special government employee, as I have told you before. He serves as a senior advisor to the president.
Our Joe Khalil with me now. Joe, this was a decision, a ruling that we've been waiting on for quite some time.
Yeah, and it was sort of what Judge Chutkan projected yesterday. This is a big win for the White House, for Elon Musk. Essentially what Judge Chutkan said is there hasn't been actual harm yet that's been shown to any of these 14 states, all Democratic-leaning states that brought forward the suit. The background is they said Doge should not be able to have a hand in firing federal workers from agencies, and they said that Doge should not also, that Musk shouldn't be in the business of being able to call shots in terms of how the government actually runs. He has too much authority. Take a look quickly. I'm going to read just a bit of the filing here. She says the court's aware Doge's unpredictable actions have resulted in considerable uncertainty and confusion. She goes on to say the possibility, though, that defendants may take actions that irreparably harm plaintiffs is not enough. In other words, it's possible you might see people in your state that are harmed by these decisions. The White House is saying something different. What they're saying is this suit was filed against Elon Musk. They say Musk is not making any of these decisions. It's the federal agencies themselves that are deciding whether to fire workers. It's the federal agencies that are deciding whether to allow Doge into their systems. He's not making decisions. He's just advising. And it's an important legal distinction there.
All right. What they're saying. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. Now we know Musk's official title, by the way, a White House court filing revealing he is a senior advisor to the president. The filing reads in part, quote, Mr. Musk has no actual or formal authority to make government decisions himself. Mr. Musk can only advise the president and communicate the president's directives. Now, a different senior advisor, Stephen Miller, defended Musk's role today.
The president appoints staff to execute his agenda. They're answerable to him. He's answerable to the American people who elected him. So democracy means a president wins an election, a president appoints staff to follow his orders, to implement his directives that he has been elected to do by the American people.
Now, while Doge and Musk's presence are new, a senior advisor to the president is not. For example, during his first administration, President Trump had several senior advisors, including his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Former President Biden had his own team of senior advisors as well. Some notable names include Mark Donnellan, Anita Dunn, two of his closest advisors, along with John Podesta, who oversaw clean energy, Gene Sperling, who oversaw the implementation of the American Rescue Plan. Joining me now, Sean Spicer, former Trump White House press secretary, host of the Sean Spicer podcast, NewsNation political contributor. Sean, always great to see you. Thanks for being here. So what's going on here? Is this good cop, bad cop with the president and Elon Musk right now? Is that how this is being handled?
Well, first of all, let's go back to the reality of this case. The bottom line is I think it would be nuts if the judge didn't decide the case the way she did, because the idea that the president of the United States, the elected head of the executive branch, should have the ability to actually review the books of the executive branch. It would have been nuts for the judge to say that the president and his appointees couldn't actually review the balance sheets and the transactions and the records of the actual branch of government that he was elected by the American people to run. That in itself, I think, doesn't pass the smell test. Secondly, what you saw in the filing was, what is needed to do to show the chain of command, the hierarchy of who calls the shots, and to make sure that ultimately it's done in a way.
What is the significance of a senior advisor?
Well, it has to do with who actually is making the distinction in the call. And so there is this office within the White House that was renamed after a Biden/Obama office, and they're just trying to make sure that there is a chain of who actually has the authority to execute these things. It's not Elon Musk actually going into the Treasury Department personally or wherever. There are other aides that have been deputized by the president, the same way that a governor has a chief of staff and a deputy, and a congressman does, and a mayor does. This is how the system works. Of course, there are people. The president of the United States has to have people that can execute on the orders that he puts forth. So, but it just has to do from a legal standpoint of making sure that somebody like Elon Musk fits within that chain of command. I mean, you mentioned some of them, Blake. Just remember, for all of the Democrats that are wringing their hands right now, one of the filings noted that it was Anita Dunn, a senior aide to President Biden, who is deemed what they call a special government employee. And that's part of the distinction here, is that he's not a full-time government employee. But it was Anita Dunn who had vast amounts of business before the federal government, didn't want to give it up, obviously not even close to being in the same league as Elon Musk. But the bottom line is the Biden administration did several things that the Trump administration is using as the predicate for how they're making decisions and the precedent.
As I noted, senior advisors to the president are not new. What's different this time around, obviously,
No. But it's not the title, but also that Elon is a special government employee, and that's part of the issue here.
Got it. Got to leave it there. Sean Spicer, always great to speak with you. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate it. Talk soon. All right. Now, tonight, 2 passengers remain in the hospital following Monday's crash at Toronto's airport, where a Delta Airlines flight flipped upside down as it landed on the tarmac. Our Alex Capriello live in Toronto this evening as the investigation continues. 17 degrees there, I'm told, Alex, behind you.
Yeah, Blake, it's really brutal out here. You get a sense of the conditions that these pilots are dealing with when they're coming in on that runway. We knew yesterday that there were wind gusts up to around 40 miles per hour at the time that plane made contact with that tarmac. I do have some breaking news developments to bring to you right now. We just heard from the Transportation Safety Board of Canada. These are the main investigators who are looking into this crash, and they say that they have recovered the black box voice recorder as well as the data recorder from that Delta aircraft. Obviously, that's going to be huge when it comes to actually finding out what went wrong. Of course, we know that everyone survived from this plane crash, which of course includes the pilot and the first officer. So we know that's already a part of the investigative process, talking to them and seeing what they remember. But right now and throughout the course of the day, we've been hearing more and more from the passengers that were inside that plane. Of course, their stories of survival. Here's one of them. Take a listen.
All of a sudden, everything just kind of went sideways. And then next thing I know is kind of a blink and I'm upside down, still strapped in. 1 minute you're landing, kind of waiting to see your friends and your people. And the next minute you're physically upside down and just really turned around.
It's really so hard to believe and imagine putting yourself into that position where all of a sudden you're flying, you see yourself descending, next thing you know you're flipped upside down, those seatbelts obviously restraining people from falling towards that ceiling, which of course now becomes the floor. But the videos that we've been seeing from inside that aircraft are unbelievable. People on their hands and knees crawling through, eventually making their way out to the tarmac. A miracle that all 80 people survived this plane crash. Blake?
Our Alex Capriello live there tonight. A miracle indeed, Alex. Thank you. Still to come here on the Hill on News Nation. SpaceX set to launch their latest rocket any moment now. It comes as NASA is possibly looking at a cut of 10% of its workforce. Is that the right move going forward with NASA? And what about this idea of, you know what? An asteroid is coming our way. Have you heard what NASA said today? The former head of the International Space Station live with us on the other side of the break. Welcome to Washington. This is the center of politics. You're watching The Hill here on News Nation. I'm Blake Berman, and we're back in 4 minutes.
Elderly dementia patients have increased risk of death or stroke. Caplyta is not approved for dementia-related psychosis. Report fever, confusion, or stiff muscles which may be life-threatening, or uncontrolled muscle movements which may be permanent. Common side effects include sleepiness, dizziness, nausea, and dry mouth. These aren't all the side effects.
In the darkness of bipolar 1 and 2 depression, Caplyta can help you let in the light. Ask your doctor about Caplyta. Find savings and support at caplyta.com.
NewsNation is an unbiased network reporting both sides of the issue.
What we're doing at NewsNation is we're just telling you the facts.
NewsNation is talking to the people that are in the middle.
So if you really want to know what's happening at our southern border, you have to live it every single day. And that's why I live here.
All right, welcome back here to the Hill on News Nation. Tonight, employees at NASA are bracing for layoffs. The space agency, among several federal offices, cutting down its workforce. NASA has roughly 17 to 18,000 employees in that range. But as we are about to watch here, any moment now, we're actually going to have the live pictures in a second. There's about to be another SpaceX launch. So when you think about, here you go, live pictures. This is SpaceX right now. They're about to have another launch in about 2 minutes or so. This is the Falcon 9 rocket, and they're going to bring more satellites up into space there. So let's consider here NASA versus SpaceX. What's going on? Let's keep these live pictures. NASA's requested roughly $25.5 billion for this fiscal year. Over the past 10 years, it's received nearly $220 billion. Now, the funding is being allocated for several objectives: deep space exploration, space operations, space technology, science, and aeronautics. Now, SpaceX is doing this at a fraction of the cost. It received more than $10 billion in venture capital, that's private money, $20 billion or so in U.S. government contracts. Joining me now is the former NASA astronaut, former International Space Station commander, Leroy Chiao. Leroy, thanks for being with us. Kind of cool to speak with you and watch this, as we believe this is taking place in the next 100 seconds or so. So as the big conversation, Leroy, here in Washington is about DOGE, and we're talking about possibly cutting 10% of NASA, is that the right figure? As a former NASA astronaut, are you good with that?
Well, I'll tell you what, NASA, like just about every other large organization, has its fair share of bureaucracy and inefficiency. The NASA of today is nothing like the NASA during the Apollo days or even during the shuttle days. And so, yes, is there fat to be cut out? Of course there is. The thing is, the issue is that
how much fat though, Leroy? Because is it 1%, 5%, 10%? If this is not the NASA of old, what do we need to do?
Sure, and I'm certainly not an expert in that, so it's hard for me to say, but I can, in generalities, compare to what's going on in industry. Up until now, civil servants have been sacred cows. They generally can't get laid off. But look at industry. Just very recently, Chevron announced they're laying off 20% of their workforce. Schlumberger laying off 25% of their workforce. Southwest Airlines laying off 15% of their workforce. Right. Blue Origin, SpaceX's competitor, announced very recently they're losing 10% of their
Bezos just did it. Yep.
Yeah. And so losing 10% of NASA, that seems right in family there. Of course, it's terrible when people lose their jobs. It's terrible for them, their families. You got to feel for these people. But at the same time, there's definitely fat in the federal government. I don't think anyone would argue with that.
What would it do to the communities? What would it do to the communities? Because I'm looking at Florida economic impact, 35,000 jobs supported. Texas, 39,000 jobs supported.
Sure. Well, you know what? This would be actually a smaller blow than the end of the shuttle program back in 2011. I mean, so many people were laid off down in Florida at the Cape, and some folks here in Houston at the Johnson Space Center and other centers. So this is, but all those people, the difference is all those people who were laid off back then were contractors. They weren't civil servants. Civil servants have always been a sacred cow up until now. And the question needs to be asked is, why have they been, sacred cows?
Right. So it's interesting to talk to you right now and watch this launch take place here in 10 seconds, because it really does kind of show the moment that we're in right now. We're talking about a SpaceX launch right now. And not something involving NASA. We did, though, hear from NASA, Leroy, today as we watched the Falcon 9 rocket launch live here, and what a sight to see there as it heads up into the skies, and talking to a former NASA astronaut as all of this happens. What about from NASA, though, Leroy, today, that there is an asteroid that could hit in 2032, and they've now bumped it up to a 3% chance?
Well, this is not an exact science when you have multiple bodies and considering orbital mechanics, predicting where something's going to go, especially, many years from now, is difficult to do. And so I would expect that estimate to be fine. And, 2-3%, that's still pretty low, and that's just a guess so far, an estimate. Again, watching this launch is spectacular. By the way, This launch of Starlink satellites is unique because the booster, the first stage, is supposed to land on a drone ship near the Bahamas, which will be a first.
Wow. We'll leave it there. Small chance, but we'll see what happens, obviously.
Right.
Leroy Chiao, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Very cool sight. Watching that live with a former astronaut. Pretty cool. All right, still much more ahead here on the Hill. The CIA expanding drone flights, taken to the skies in a much different way, and a much different story here. They're using this as a way to spy on the drug cartels. This is the next evolution, and the best in the business, our Allie Bradley, joins us live on the other side. Plus, the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul. Is she going to oust the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams? That has never been done, ever. So what comes next? You're watching The Hill. Welcome back here to The Hill on NewsNation. Pope Francis remains hospitalized tonight after developing pneumonia in both lungs. New tests showing further complications to his condition. His hospitalization has forced the cancellation of several events. The Vatican releasing a statement, though, today saying Pope Francis is, quote, in good spirits. Back here at home, just about 6:30 here in Washington and in the Big Apple. The New York City Mayor, Eric Adams, set to deliver remarks any moment now at the New York Police Department Guardians Association's Black History Month celebration. Now it comes as the mayor's political future is at stake potentially. The governor there, Kathy Hochul, meeting today with officials weighing whether Adams should be removed from his post. Now that has never occurred in the history of New York. But Democrats are calling on Adams to resign after he aligned himself with the Trump administration's immigration policies, as his federal corruption charges are trying to be dropped by the Justice Department. Meantime, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem debuting a multi-billion-dollar domestic and international ad campaign to combat illegal immigration.
Let me deliver a message from President Trump to the world. If you are considering entering America illegally, don't even think about it. Let me be clear. If you come to our country and you break our laws, we will hunt you down.
It comes as the U.S. Army Special Forces Group are now in Mexico to help train its Marine infantry through March 30th. The New York Times also reporting that the CIA is now expanding secret drone flights over Mexico to track down fentanyl labs. Our Allie Bradley live with us once again from Del Rio, Texas, with all the movement down there. Allie?
Yeah, hey, Blake. So these Reaper drones are quite literally on the hunt in Mexico. They're looking for the criminal cartels and their fentanyl labs. And the reason that they're doing it from the air is because these fentanyl labs apparently emit some kind of chemical that makes it easier to find from above. So these are called MQ-9 Reaper drones. They're carrying out these stealth missions, and they are not armed, but according to multiple reports, they could be if they needed to be, if they needed to carry out some kind of airstrike. But right now what we've learned is that the CIA does not have the authorization to arm these drones. Right now what they're doing is they are working to gather intelligence from above, and what they're doing is relaying that back to Mexican authorities so that they can actually clamp down on this. We know Claudia Sheinbaum says that they are going to do more to dismantle these fentanyl labs. The Trump administration putting the pressure on them with these Reaper drones. Now it's interesting here because this is not the first time we've seen surveillance drones utilized. It was actually kind of a secret program started under the Biden administration, but back then they were working in conjunction with Mexican officials. This time around, the Trump administration, according to the New York Times, sent out a notification, but that notification actually kind of allowed for this operation to remain covert and to remain a situation that the CIA could ultimately kind of cover up, Blake. So with this round of these drone surveillance ops, they have not interacted with the Mexican officials, but when Claudia Sheinbaum was pushed on it today from U.S. media, she kind of waved it off, Blake. She kind of said, oh, it's part of a little campaign. So we'll see what happens there, but we know the Trump administration is slated to designate at least 6 of these cartels and gangs as terrorist organizations. We expect that to happen sometime this week. Blake?
Part of a little campaign. It's what foreign leaders do. They reveal some, not all. Right, Allie? Our Allie Bradley, live on the southern border tonight. Allie, thank you. All right, you are looking live right now.
Thank you.
Yellowstone National Park. Would you look at that? If you get lucky, roughly every 45 minutes or so, you'll get to see Old Faithful shoot up from the ground. But now there's a new experience in some national parks. Firings. For example, here's some headlines from the state of Montana. The Flathead Beacon. It hurts so much. Wilderness workers and park employees feel from layoffs as cuts to federal workforce manifest in Montana. The Daily Interlake. The Forest Service lays off 360 Montana-based workers. Bozeman Daily Chronicle. Mass layoffs at the U.S. Forest Service. Public lands at risk. It's all, of course, a part of the efforts with DOJ and to skim back the government workforce. And joining me now is the Republican from the state of Montana, Congressman Ryan Zinke, who was also, by the way, the first Secretary of the Department of the Interior in the Trump administration, the first go-around. Congressman, thanks for being back with us.
Hey, great to be with you. I'm in Montana, and it is snowing, and it is gorgeous.
That picture did look gorgeous. So, look, DOJ, Congressman, right? You are, correct me if I'm wrong, among the many that believe that DOJ need to look into government spending. Peel it back. Let's trim back. But I wonder how it works when you see those headlines in your own community with your constituents losing their jobs. What's the balance?
Well, a couple things. One is the concern was the seasonal workers coming up. Fire season, obviously is a concern. And in parks, the summer season, they get a lot bigger. So you look at the seasonal, those have been exempt. And, the last hiring, and what did they get hired for? 4 years ago, what did the hiring look like? It was thousands of people hired for old growth regulation. Looking at that, probably. So I think it's fair to look at it. They were last year's, probationary. But the bottom line is this. If the job is important, you'll keep it. If the job is on the line, it'll be looked at. And if the job is unnecessary, it'll be cut.
Well, with hundreds, though, in your community potentially losing their jobs, how does it impact your neighbors and those who live around you?
Well, again, what do they do? Is a job critical? And where's the government at? What was that job? Should they be reorganized? Look, in Department of Defense, which is a little different, Department of Defense has 800,000 DOD employees. That's non-uniform. And you look at how much that costs our government, that's about $200 billion when you add in pension, salary, and health care. And on combat strength, that's about 16 aircraft carriers a year in combat strength. Some of our parks, you look at what jobs are critical. As a Secretary of Interior, what critical was in my parks when I ran it? Clean bathrooms. I didn't shut down parks. I made sure it was clean bathrooms. So we're going to look through it. I trust that Doug Burgum, the Secretary of Interior, is going to evaluate it. And at the end of the day, when the park season starts, they're going to have the right level of employees in our parks, and everyone's going to enjoy our beautiful, beautiful gyms of our public lands.
Let me ask you about it, because you were, of course, the Department of the Interior, the secretary, the head of it, in the first Trump administration. 67,000 total employees, 11 sub-agencies, $17 billion in outlays in 2024. You know what's there, Congressman. You ran the place for a couple years. In your view, how much of it needs to go?
Well, I think the question should be, let's reorganize. And really quickly, even if you have a salmon and a trout in the same stream, you have Forest Service. The top is agriculture through Department of Agriculture. Underneath is Department of Interior through Bureau of Reclamation. You have two different departments in the same stream. I thought it's not a matter of cutting sometimes or even savings. What it's a matter of is reorganizing so you can do the mission.
But some folks have to go, right?
You look at reorganization. I think a lot of this is legacy. And what do we face? We face permitting, we face conservation, and recreation. Those are the three biggest uses of our public lands, and we want to reorganize so we meet those missions.
I hear you on reorganize. If Elon Musk were to ask you, or the Doge team were to ask you, if you need to drop down the number of employees, if you need to drop down the spending, what would you tell them?
Well, on the spending side, I would say, look, let's reorganize for success. Let's make sure on public lands that we take care of our public lands, that we manage our public lands. Let's make sure they don't burn down every year. So what's the level of effort we need to do to manage it? And do we need that many biologists to do study after study after study? Or do we need more foresters to make sure we have a healthy forest? I think everything's on the table. I like what Doge is doing. Let's shake it up, because business as usual is not working in the great outdoors. We're burning our forests up. We're not using our resources wisely. And I think everyone can say there's a lot of room for improvement. But first, let's get rid of the fraud, waste, and abuse.
Let me leave you with this. The parks are not in danger from your perch.
No, actually, I think the parks are in pretty good shape, because Doug Burgum, there's no one better in our parks. And look, he's got a lot of advice, and we want to make sure our parks are healthy and last in the future, because they are America's greatest gem.
Okay. Congressman Ryan Zinke from a very chilly but very beautiful, as we saw there with the live pictures, state of Montana tonight. Congressman, thanks for being with us once again here on the Hill. Appreciate it.
Blake, it's always a pleasure, and God bless.
Got it. All right, still to come. Here tonight, the FAA under even more scrutiny after 80 people survived that major plane crash in Toronto. There is now a back and forth between the current Transportation Secretary and the former Transportation Secretary. One of the former right hands is with us on the other side of the break. What's the truth? What's the reality of what's going on when we return?
Bill O'Reilly on Cuomo.
You're on your game tonight, Cuomo, even though you need a tie.
America's favorite sparring duo with TV's liveliest, most honest debate.
Just to be clear, I disagree with Bill.
Tomorrow at 8/7 Central, only on NewsNation.
#1 digital source for political news from Washington. Together to bring you the latest insight on the events shaping politics today.
No funny business polls, only the good stuff.
NewsNation Politics, powered by The Hill.
I was just in a plane crash. Oh my God.
Oh man, could you imagine? It's a flyer's worst nightmare. Tonight, 19 passengers have been released from the hospital. 2 still hospitalized after that Delta Airlines flight flipped upside down in Toronto yesterday. It comes as Elon Musk's Doge team wants to upgrade the FAA, and as somewhere around a few hundred FAA employees have been fired. That crash yesterday in Canada, by the way. Doge, of course, dealing with the United States. The current Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, by the way, going at it with his predecessor, Pete Buttigieg. These two back and forth on social. The secretary writing, quote, Mayor Pete failed for 4 years to address the air traffic controller shortage and upgrade our outdated World War II era traffic control system. In less than 4 weeks, we have already begun the process and are engaging the smartest minds in the entire world. Now, Buttigieg responded by saying, quote, at least one of the claims here is demonstrably false, so forgive us for seeking more specifics on the rest. Is the secretary claiming, and will he show that none of the hundreds of FAA personnel he just fired were important to safety? Just a little between those two. T.W. Origi with me now, along with the full panel. T.W., former communications aide to Senator Lindsey Graham. Linda Tran, former senior advisor to Pete Buttigieg. How about that? Ashley Davis, former official in the George W. Bush White House. And Dan Cannon, former Battleground States Director for both the Obama and Harris campaigns. Hello to you all.
Hello.
Nice to have you in. Anybody want to take a guess who we start with here? What's going on?
Do it, Blake.
What's going on?
Well, what's going on is that my former boss is defending his record. And so far, what we've seen from this administration, I think there's plenty of good intention, but maybe a little bit fast and loose on the actual data and the details. In that quote that you just pulled up just a moment ago, for example, he said that the previous administration didn't do anything about air traffic controllers. And in fact, for the first time in many decades, my team, my former boss, got the number of recruits that we actually set a goal for, in fact, exceeding it last year for the first time in decades. So it's not exactly accurate. The other big piece of this, of course, when we talk about this all the time, is the IIJA, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, put another $25 billion into airports all around this country. So it's
there's still a big problem, though, right, with the FAA and air traffic controller.
There's definitely a decades-long downward spiral that needs to be countered right now, but I just don't think it's terribly fruitful to point at data that's not exactly accurate.
Linda's right. I think it was something like 3,400 new controllers under the previous.
1,802.
1,802. Okay, well, it's still very, very good in the last 4 years under that leadership, as she mentioned. And all these folks that we're talking about are being cut indiscriminately right now, many of whom are directly responsible for safety or have some safety role. If you do want to address safety at this agency, and anyone that works at DOT will tell you, especially NTSB and FAA, that safety is the North Star of what they do, then you come in with that mindset. You don't do it by slashing and burning and then asking questions later who you might have cut.
45,000 total employees, 14,000 air traffic controllers. When you talk about 400 employees, and trust me, I get it. Losing a job is not fun. It stinks, especially when you have family, especially when you have kids. But it's 1%, right? So the slashing, I'm not sure this is slashing.
Here's my point, Blake. I don't think anyone's going to say, I'm certainly not going to say, that the cuts happening were a direct result, or this was a direct result of those cuts, or even the previous crash we saw in the Potomac, or any of that stuff. No one is making that claim, even though Donald Trump made some pretty outrageous claims the other way on DEI. But it is very true. If you want to come in and work on safety, come in and work on safety, and don't do this and pretend that that's really your focus.
But we don't really have any idea who was let go. I mean, obviously it is horrible to lose your job, and I agree 100%, but we don't know if there was poor performance. I know a lot of them were new, either the last year or two that they've been hired. I don't know why everyone is so shocked. The administration knew exactly what they were doing today after all these plane crashes, laying off anybody at the FAA. They were going to get bad press about it. Doesn't take a brain surgery to figure that out. I just don't understand why not doing anything or waiting to review, Dan, is the answer. I mean, having Elon and his team that actually are from SpaceX come in and take a look at this, I actually think they're the best in the business.
Conflict of interest there, right? There's going to be the argument of Elon going into the FAA. I mean, they've regulated him, and they've had back and forths there.
And he got a bad result that he didn't like.
When it comes to logistical systems, I'm going to trust Elon over 99% of all humans on the planet. But let me go back to something else. I agree that you are not making the case that these planes are falling out of the sky because of Doge, but others are. So we've heard Democrats tell us in recent months we ought not politicize tragedies. We also heard them say a number of times, well, we all know there's bloat and waste in government, and sign me up for doing it. And then every time a dime is cut, an employee is fired, the sky is falling, and planes are going with it. And I think that is completely irresponsible. These 400 workers were probationary. They have been there for under 2 years. Okay, this is an incredibly small amount of the workforce, and there were 0 air traffic controllers and 0 safety officials. Also, the back and forth you saw alluded to in those tweets was the telework rate. Sean Duffy claimed that something like 90% of FAA, basically no one worked from home except for air traffic controllers.
Well,
I don't know if that rate is right, but I would guarantee it's a pretty high number.
First of all, we do know who some of the people that were laid off among the 400. And many of them literally have the word safety in their title. They are safety specialists. They are the mechanics that inspect the operations. If you don't think that those roles are part of the safe operations of the FAA.
I have president in my title, and I'm not the president.
Let me ask you this, though. knowing what you know, it's safe to fly.
It is absolutely the safest way to travel. 100%.
I just want to throw that out there, right? Okay. All right. Meantime, could we soon see another political oust? The governor in the state of New York, Kathy Hochul, meeting with officials today to discuss a path forward after 4 top deputies resigned over the mayor's cooperation with the Trump administration and its immigration policies. Mayor Eric Adams facing pressure within his own party to resign following the Justice Department's efforts to drop the federal corruption charges against him. Here's the thing, and I'll start with the Democrats real quick. The party had an issue with immigration, right? How to talk about immigration. You have a Democrat now who is saying, all right, I'm going to follow the Trump administration's lead. I get it. This all could look for some a little fishy. But he's basically doing what the country says he wants them to do when it comes to immigration in across this country.
That's not the problem, Blake. And that's a nice, convenient storyline here.
No, it's not a convenient storyline. I mean, it's just a 30,000-foot view of what's going on.
Sure, but let me give you my perspective on Eric Adams. He came in and wanted to be the moderate at a time when maybe Democrats had gone a little too far and defund the police, and came in to crack down and to be a little more of this conservative Mike Bloomberg-type mayor, and won. And a lot of Democrats said, hey, that's good. This is actually the model we should follow. We didn't oust him from the party at that point. What Eric Adams did is not an immigration problem. What he did is he took $100,000, maybe more, from Turkey, and then took that money to establish his campaign finance co-benefit from the city of New York, which is fleecing taxpayers, and got caught and has a prosecution that's now being hung over his head. Trump's not pardoning him. Trump's not commuting a sentence. He wants to hang this over his head so he can control Eric Adams, and that's inappropriate, which is why New Yorkers want him out.
So what you would say?
I'm not sure. I mean, that's definitely a conspiracy theory. I do think that he thought that Eric Adams does a good job on immigration. I mean, listen, Republicans like him, but we were laughing earlier. Republicans like him more than ever, and if he does get taken out of mayor of New York, he can come to the Trump administration.
Yeah, well, I would say Adams has always been further to the right than the rest of the Democratic Party on immigration and law enforcement in general. And also, there is a lot of issues with the case with Turkey, but even as Mayor Bill de Blasio said, the underlying case isn't very good. It's very weak. So I would say this to the governor of New York: fire him. We're less than a year away from the election in 2025. Everyone knows the fact. No, but hear me out. The reason is,
I'll hear you out, and then I got to
take away with Harris, pulling Biden at the last minute, not giving people a choice with Harris. Let's play that script again. I like it.
Fire him?
No. On June 24th, he'll lose the primary.
But he still will be mayor until January, whenever the swearing-in is.
We'll see.
It's a tough scenario. Look, I think leadership is reflected by the people that work for you. And when you see 4 deputy mayors submitting their resignations, including one of whom I know very well, who left her very good job to work for him because she believed in him. Now, his defense is, those people always wanted to undermine me. Doesn't pass the Smith sniff test.
Thank y'all. Appreciate it. Still to come, other side of the break. I was sitting back this weekend and I was like, whoa, Tiger Woods just said something. What does it have to say about that guy right there as well? I'll explain. Other side. What's coming up next? The families of Americans still detained in Russia, waiting for news that their loved ones are about to come home. Elizabeth will be talking to the sister and best friend of a Texas man named David Barnes, who was sentenced to 21 years in a high-security penal colony. At 7 o'clock, right here on News Nation. All right, but before that, I've been doing this long enough to know that with President Trump, you never know what's coming or when it's coming. I was watching the PGA Tour event over the weekend on Sunday. Never thought politics would come up, but then this happened. Tiger Woods in the broadcast booth revealed that he and the head of the PGA Tour are set to meet with President Trump. It would be their second meeting of its kind since early February. Tiger claiming, quote, "We're going to get the game going in the right direction." Now, the divorce in professional golf is with the PGA Tour and Live Golf, both sides trying to strike a deal to pave a way forward. Tomorrow, President Trump is expected to speak at a conference hosted by Saudi Arabia's Sovereign Wealth Fund, which, by the way, is the one financially backing Live Golf. Could some big announcement come soon? Sure sounds like it's not far off. As Tiger said, quote, "I think things are going to heal quickly."